Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, AI at the Edge, How to Embrace Agentic Workflows Without Creating a Compliance Nightmare. I'm Dylan Agner, Marketing Specialist of the Oasis Group, and I'll be your host today for this insightful webinar featuring John O'Connell of the Oasis Group and Ken Lotocki of Conquest Planning. Together, they'll unpack the rise of shadow AI and vibe coding and explain why a deterministic, verifiable calculation engine matters when you're deploying agents. For a quick introduction for our speakers before we jump to the conversation, Ken Lotocki is the Chief Product Officer at Conquest Planning. He brings nearly 2 decades of expertise in the financial services technology space, including a wealth of expertise in product management and business analysis. As one of Conquest Planning's founders, Ken plays a pivotal role in shaping the company's product direction and AI strategy. His unwavering dedication and keen eye for innovation have been instrumental in driving Conquest Planning's growth and success in the dynamic financial technology space. He holds an honors Bachelor of Commerce degree from the University of Manitoba. John O'Connell is the founder of the Oasis Group, a leading consultancy for the wealth management industry that offers award-winning consulting services, industry-leading research, and compelling on-demand training. A recognized thought leader on artificial intelligence and financial services, John has spoken at over 25 AI conferences and regularly appears in wealth management press and media. Thank you all for joining me today. And one quick note for everyone that's with us before we jump into this conversation. We're going to hold all audience questions until the end of the discussion. If you have any questions, please submit them in the chat box or in the Q&A section. With that, let's get into the discussion. John, this first question is for you. You speak with wealth management firms constantly, and the conversation around AI has shifted. It used to be, are you using AI? Now it's something new. Advisors aren't just using AI tools, they're building with them. What's the risk when firms start going down that road without guardrails?
I think one of the big risks that you have is, if you start really kind of going down the route and you don't have any guardrails on it, you've got two issues that can pop out. The first is you're going to have a lot of folks that are probably testing out and rolling out tools on their own, which if they're using free versions of the tools or even in some of the paid versions of the tools, that's going to be problematic because your non-public information, your personally identifiable information, and your intellectual property could be out there, just where people can basically, be able to see that data. And then the second is you've got this, and that basically comes back to the shadow AI, right? Whereas I don't know what's out there. I don't know what people have deployed. I don't know what's happening to my data as it's gone out there. So that's one of the biggest challenges. And then I think the second biggest challenge, and we're going to talk about this quite a bit, is when you think about vibe coding, right? This is where you have non-technical folks that are leveraging artificial intelligence to develop technology. And I think vibe coding has got its place, but you really need to have a computer scientist or a professional coder get in there and take a look at what you've developed because you may not know what questions to ask artificial intelligence. For example, did you protect this code against an injection attack? Do I have any public keys that are available in here in plain text? There's a whole host of questions you really should be asking. And if you're not technical and you don't know what to ask, artificial intelligence will develop an application for you. It's just not going to be secure. So you really got to be careful of that.
Yeah, Ken, you use the term vibe coding to describe what happens when advisors or their teams start building their own AI-powered tools, often with public models and client data. Walk us through what that looks like in practice and why it keeps you up at night from a compliance and security standpoint.
For sure. So first, I mean, there's generally when someone decides to vibe code, they're coming at it with good intentions. They want to build something that makes it easier. They want to, maybe it's some reduction in workflow. But so that's one thing I want to throw out there. But the second thing is like let's define vibe coding. And so basically that's when someone discovers that they can design a tool in an LLM in plain English and then have Claude Code or whatever it is build it. So there's no IT, there's no tickets. They've just kind of talked to it. As an example, I want a tool that can create a net worth statement, and then I want to use that to run a retirement projection, then it exists. After 15 minutes or however long it takes and how many tokens you burn. But the problem is that what happens in those 15 minutes, so in the event that they might be doing that, perhaps that what they've done is they've pasted client data into a public model or in order to generate said statement or said projection. They're connecting things without understanding where the data persists. They have no idea if the output that gets generated on that projection is deterministic. They have no idea if that same request tomorrow will give a different answer with the same inputs. So what keeps me up at night, what concerns, and then even touching on John's point is, um, you know, is that the tool and what they've done actually looks legit. It has maybe a clean UI, it has a clean report, clean graph, clean chart, and it gives, and this is, we all know this with AI, when you're not kind of using that, the engine is it feels confident. It's giving confident answers, and people will trust it, especially the person who vibe coded it because they built it. But what's not there is no audit trail. There's no compliance review. There's no way to verify whether or not the math that was used to build that thing is correct. And literally, that's not innovation. I think I heard someone say it once. That's a liability waiting to surface as soon as, because who's on the hook for that thing that was just built? Is it the model? Is it the person who maybe forgot the prompt to say, confirm the answers? Where did you get the answer? And then what's worse, I think, is when someone then tries to monetize that, not the result, but the prompt. And then we've seen this now. LinkedIn is littered with the 21st century snake oil salesman saying, "Ping me for all my prompts. It will help you build the thing." And so vibe coding is comes from a good place, but can lead to a bad place.
Yeah, John, anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think Ken really hit the nail on the head with some of that, right? I mean, we've seen so many folks that have come out and said, "Hey, subscribe to a newsletter to get my prompts," or, you buy the prompts that I've created as a leg up in your AI development. And that there's a whole host of challenges associated with that. Number one, what version or what large language model will those prompts build for? That's going to be, you're going to get different results with the
Hmm.
exact same prompt across different LLMs. So that's problem number one. And then problem number two is you really got to take a look at, does that prompt really give you a leg up or not, right? In a lot of cases, you're going to get a result, but it's probably going to be pretty generic. So you've really got to watch for what you're doing with those prompts. I also love, by the way, Ken, you probably have seen this too, right? I saw a story the other day. Artificial intelligence gives bad financial advice around estate planning to somebody. And you go and look at the prompt, and the prompt's like, I want to develop an estate plan. What do you recommend? Right? And you look at
Yeah.
that and you're like, okay, ask a silly question, get a very silly answer.
Yeah.
Right? So the prompts that I find where people are using this clickbait and it's like a one-line prompt and they're making this blanket statement that AI gives bad results, that's doing a real disservice to artificial intelligence, and it's a terrible disservice to the person who published it, because anyone that knows anything about artificial intelligence looks at that and says, put in bad prompt, get bad answer. Not surprising. So there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that's being sown in various parts of this space at this point. Some of which are people that want you to buy their prompt. Some of which are people that, they want you to buy their services. So they tell you that they're going to help you with prompt engineering, or they're going to provide you with some off-the-shelf capability. The reality of it is what you really need is you need some really good training around this, and you really need a lot of experimentation, and you're going to get some very good results. But it's not a light switch. You can't turn on artificial intelligence and all of a sudden be 1,000 times more efficient. You really do need to go through the process of learning a lot of these tools.
Yeah, absolutely. John, shadow AI is a concept that most firm leaders haven't fully reckoned with yet. What is it? How does it spread inside your firm? And what are the practical steps leadership can take ahead of it before it becomes a real liability?
So it's very interesting. We had a client that we started working with, and we said to them, well, we have to first understand what artificial intelligence has been deployed throughout the organization. And they said, none. We haven't deployed any AI. It's like, okay. So what we did is we put together a quick survey, just 7 questions. One of which was, hey, we're going to be licensing artificial intelligence. We'd love to know what you're using today for work so that we have a good idea of what we should look at licensing. 27 tools were deployed in the organization. So what happened? By not having a framework, by not having an acceptable use policy and saying these are the tools that we're going to allow you to use and these are the tools that we're not going to allow you to use, without any guardrails, you're essentially telling everyone there's no guardrails. You can be anywhere you want on the reservation. It's completely fine. Go off the reservation. It's all okay. So you've got to put these guardrails together. When you don't, you get what we just described a moment ago, which is shadow AI, where artificial intelligence is being used by your team members pretty broadly across the organization in a lot of cases. And they are not you're not giving them any guidance on how to protect the firm's information, the client's information in these artificial intelligence tools, number one. And number two, if they're using them for work, the worst case scenario is it's a client information going out there unprotected. You can bet your bottom dollar, though, that they're using it for information within the firm, right? Which could include non-public information, like, hey, help me really quickly to send this email about someone's performance to someone else, right? Or it could be, hey, I want you to analyze this corporate presentation that we have and give me feedback on it. As soon as you've done that, your intellectual property has gone out or your NPI has gone out the door. So really understanding that if you're not giving any guidance, they're probably using tools. If they're using tools that you don't know about, that is by definition shadow AI.
Ken, anything you want to add to that?
I mean, just to re-emphasize what John said, I mean, at a firm level, like the treat it like any other technology risk, right? You need to get ahead of it, and so you need to get ahead of it with visibility. You need policy, and you need a legitimate alternative for what folks are trying to do. So come at it from the use case. So I want to use AI for email generation. I want to use AI to help me with my meeting agenda. I want to use AI to help me generate client output. Like if those are the asks, take it back to the problem. And really what the problem is, I want to move faster, I want more effectively, I want to get rid of the mundane and things like that. But know what people want to do, build visibility around it, make sure everyone's transparent, make sure there's a policy, and then, then lean into it. And then that will help. So
Yeah, and to build a little bit on what Ken just said a moment ago, right? Like you've got all of these clients that are out there trying to do the right thing. You also need to keep up to speed on the technology you've already rolled out, right? So
mhm.
we had a conversation this morning with a client who said, I want to be able to interrogate K1 documents that are coming in to the organization. And they were like, we're going to have to go out and buy a new tool or build something. And when we spoke with them, we said, well, these are the tools you already have. This tool that you already own will do that document pre-processing already. You don't have to go buy something or build something else. They weren't aware of that. They thought it was a niche tool. They thought it was a note taker, quite frankly. And when you take a look and say that tool can actually do what you're asking it to do, or what that will satisfy your use case more precisely, then you don't have to go out and build some of this stuff. You don't have to go buy some of it. So you do need to have that structure, but that structure isn't just to cut down on the shadow AI. It's also to cut
Mhm.
down on these what can become a runaway expenditure, right? Where people are just buying these tools, many of which, if you do a Venn diagram, are quite duplicative. So you've got to figure out how do I maximize what I'm already spending money on so that I don't just go buy another shiny penny.
Yeah. Ken, I got a question for you now. There's an important
Yeah.
distinction between AI tools that have some agentic features and a platform built on a deterministic, verifiable calculation engine. What does the architectural difference matter when an advisor is running a client scenario, and what breaks down when it is not there?
Yeah, no, great question. So the thing with this, when an advisor runs a scenario, so for example, what happens to this client if they lose their job at 50? What happens to the plan specifically? What happens to the retirement conversation? So I'll tell you, the answer has to be the same every single time given the inputs. It's not optional in financial advice. It is not optional in financial planning. It is the foundation of fiduciary accountability. So a general purpose AI model is probabilistic by design. It's brilliant and it's useful, and I personally love it for helping to understand context, generate responses. But and I'm going to emphasize this, and I know John will also bring this in. It is not a calculation engine. It is not good at math. If you ask an LLM to run a Monte Carlo simulation, model a Roth conversion ladder, whatever, you're going to get a plausible sounding answer, but it's off by enough to matter, and that's the problem with it. So the architecture we use, as an example, um, separates those concerns. So when it comes to plugging in things like a deterministic calculation engine into an LM, the AI will handle the conversation, it will handle the context, it will handle the interpretation of what the advisor is asking. What happens if my client loses their job at 50? The calculation engine um, will, because it's deterministic, auditable, rules based, will handle the math. Those two things never blur together. And the distinction is what makes the output trustworthy is what makes it useful and actually right to share with a client in the room. Um, again, that the answer, again, asking it different ways, asking it whatever it is, if the core of it is that specific scenario, you can't get two, three, four, five different answers. It's got to be the same answer. How it gets communicated, how it gets distilled, how it gets, the client responds to it might be different, but the math has to be correct behind it.
Yeah, and I think to build on what Ken was just saying, we use artificial intelligence and large language models interchangeably in layman's terms, right? They are not the same thing.
No.
Um, Artificial intelligence covers a very wide range of capabilities. Large language models are one very small sliver of that. Large language models are based, just like Ken said, on probabilities. Okay, think of it like your old when you first got your phone and you started texting, it would try to finish the word for you. So you put th, it would go that or the, right? The probability that it was that or the was very high. So it gave you one of those three options. It might have gave you three as the next one. And then as you started doing it, you would type the sentence, I'll meet you, and it would say at 2 o'clock or on Sunday, right? It would try to finish your sentence based on the probability, based on the context of your conversation. It would try to finish that sentence. What we're seeing today with large language models is they're so large and they've got so many data points that they can run trillions of these different probabilities. And what it does is it narrows it down based on these tokens. If you know what tokens are, you pay for those. But based on that, it's trying to narrow down the probability to a specific set of tokens that are most likely what you're trying to get across. Now, large language models are so advanced, you can write an entire white paper this way. But what it's really doing is it's taking your input, it's interpreting it as the best that it can based on probabilities, and it's going to generate an output. That's not mathematics. That's probability analysis. There are other forms of artificial intelligence, like machine learning and things like that, that will do very, very good. They'll tap into calculation engines and do a great job of accelerating those types of calculations. That's not the same thing. So to use a large language model for something it's not built for, which is really kind of machine learning, calculation engines, really complex workflow capability, that's not what it's used for. Now, can a large language model map your workflow out? Absolutely. Can it interview your team member to help you map out the workflow? Absolutely. Is it a workflow engine that will rival business process management? Absolutely not. It's not even going to come close. You need to have a completely different model to be able to do that. So I think what we find a lot of times is people need to be very careful that you have a tool, and that tool is extremely useful, but it's a tool that's made for a single purpose. And I'm very fond of saying I can hammer a nail in with a crescent wrench. The nail will not be happy, nor will the crescent wrench at the end of it. But I have a tool. It's better if you go get a hammer for that, right? If you're using language and you want to be able to use probabilistic calculations to determine language, a large language model is perfect for that. Make sure you understand what tool you have in your hand before you start using it.
I love that.
Thanks.
And I mean, we've seen that a lot, and I mean, it's interesting. The hope that asking the question the same way might come up with the same answer and thing on. But what people forget, and you mentioned it before, with all the updates we're getting to model, we're on what Claude, Sonnet 4.7 now, 4.8 soon. Just because you ask the question in 4.5, it will be different in 4.7 because the models are learning, it's being trained on data and all of those things. And so again, the one thing that keeps it consistent is a deterministic engine that's behind that. It might be answered in a different way, but again, it's not going to be a different answer when it's going to the math, going to the engine to get the response back. But 100%. Yeah, love the way you said that with the tool analogy there, John. See,
Thank
we
you.
we
Thank you
we
very
vibe
much.
on everything. This is great. Forget about vibe coding. We're vibing on vibe webinars. There we go.
Yep.
Yeah.
John, piggybacking off what you were saying earlier, let's talk about the build versus buy question. Some firms that think they can just stick together Claude and a few APIs and call it an AI workflow. What are the things that they're not thinking about? Security, PII, encryption at rest and in transit, injection attacks, and at what point does that prototype need to go to a computer scientist to get hardened?
So think about it like this, right? I mean, I'll use an easy sports analogy. For most people in North America understand football pretty well. So your quarterback gets the ball, he throws it, there's a spiral that goes around that ball, and then it's caught by a receiver. When you think about passing data between two systems, right, which is you're basically creating a middleware, a middle layer between these two applications, what's really happening? Well, the quarterback needs to know how to get the ball. That's one set of APIs. He needs to be able to throw the ball. That's a completely different set of APIs. That ball needs to spiral, right? So while it's spiraling, as soon as he releases it, it needs to be encrypted because it's going through the air. Anybody can get it, right? So anybody can catch that ball. It needs to be encrypted so it gets to the other place without any of the data being stolen as it goes. While it's spiraling, that's your ability to do, extract, transform, and load. You're transforming the data so that the receiver can catch it in a way that they understand it. In other words, they're catching it via their API and they're being able to process the data. All of that capability sounds very simple, but it's actually very, very, very complex. You have to be able to understand what does the quarterback can send, what's the receiver going to receive? How do I need to transform that data in the middle? How do I make sure that both of those endpoints are encrypted? How do I make sure that the transit of the data is encrypted? How do I make sure that no one intercepts my ball? That's an injection attack, right? Or they're injecting bad data into it, or they're intercepting the data. They could be sniffing it to be able to look at the data as it goes across. All of those challenges need to have a professional computer scientist look at them, right? Because everything I just described, most lay people get the football analogy, but they don't understand the other bits and pieces that go into that. The encryption at rest, the encryption in transit, the ability to inject bad data into it, the ability to sniff data out of it. So that's one of the things that I think vibe coding is fantastic for prototyping. Okay. I can spend 3 weeks with a web developer trying to set up what a screen looks like and try to explain business rules to that person who's a developer and not a financial advisor. I may spend more than 3 weeks. I may spend about 2 months doing that. I could vibe code that in like a day, okay, or in a couple of days. That's great. That gives you velocity. But remember what we always talk about with artificial intelligence. It should give you velocity, but it should never remove human agency. It should never replace the human in the loop. So it's great that you were able to vibe code that and you got some really great velocity in creating your business rules and outlining the way the screen's going to look. At the end of that, if you're not the licensed professional to be able to say this is the advice that I want to give, then please go get a professional developer to take a look at that code and make sure that it's ready to go to production. No one in the financial advisory space would say, I'm going to take the output of artificial intelligence and put it in front of my client without reading it and making sure that it's correct. And you shouldn't. Why would you consider doing that with software that you're developing? It's the same thing. Don't do that. Have a professional who understands how to perform that role to the best of their ability. Review this before it goes out.
I saw it. I saw a quote on LinkedIn that ties into this, and I forget who said it. So if that person's listening or they pick this up and they wonder who it's attributed to, but I think the comment was what these tools will do, what artificial intelligence will do, or all these connections will do, it will change the role of even the data scientist from the writer to the editor. And that's what's happening in this case. And it's becoming more important to be that editor to understand because I mean, I know you guys have seen this and I've seen this is there are firms popping up that are throwing demos out on LinkedIn, throwing demos out everywhere. They've built the demo in a weekend. They've vibe coded this thing that's awesome. But you know what's going to happen? As soon as someone starts using it, they're going to spend the next month, year, 2 years discovering everything they didn't know they needed because they didn't get an expert, they didn't get the right person, they didn't get the right team behind it to identify what they actually needed. They didn't prepare. We mentioned this before for the fact that OpenAI and Anthropic and Gemini update their models on a fairly frequent basis, right? And so you didn't account for changes in the model. Your carefully tuned prompts behave differently now, and you don't know why, because they're not built and pointed to a deterministic source. So the funny part is, or not even the funny part, but the scary part is, I should say, is that some of these firms and some of these folks And this is why, firms like the Oasis Group are helpful. As an example, is you actually don't know in some cases, if you're diving into this, that you need a calculation engine expert, you need a data scientist until you've far crossed that line. So the earlier in that you have folks understanding what you're building, how you're putting it together, what you want to vibe code, have someone check your work and do the math and be that editor for you, it's more important than ever with these with where we're going.
Yeah, I like that editor analogy. That's a really good one.
I wish I gotta find who it was in case they hear that and they go through it. So it's not mine.
Yeah, Ken, you've actually gone hands-on and built agentic prototypes, including a live what-if analysis tool that lets advisors model scenarios like job loss interactively in a meeting. Without getting too deep into the technical weeds, can you paint a picture of what that looks like and why headless architecture makes that possible?
Yeah. So picture an advisor sitting with a client who just got a severance letter, just was told that they're losing their job. So instead of saying, "Let me get back to you," which happens in the episodic Wizard of Oz approach to advisor-client relationships of old, the advisor can open a tool, describe the conversation or describe the scenario, sorry, conversationally. And again, client is 57, they have, $2 million in assets, spouse is still working, severance covers X number of months. I mean, you got to be precise, right? In the prompt, in the conversation with it. And within seconds, the tool is modeling the impact across tax, cash flow, social security timings may be factored in, retirement score, retirement projection, other goals that might be difficult. All those things, all those important immutable things that need to be considered before advice is provided. And so all of that happens with the right question, the right context, put into the model, you're putting it back in that tool you opened up. But what makes it possible, especially with what we built, is a headless architecture. So all of those questions, all of that scenario, so on, is going into using the data, using the structure of the client scenario, the client profile built into the plan. And in this case, headless means that the calculation has no fixed UI of its own. It's APIs, it's MCP. Um, the front end is dynamically constructed. The output is constructed on the description that the advisor is providing. The AI is interpreting the natural language, structured into the right parameters, either fires back a result or fire back, some sort of clean visual or dashboard that can be generated out of the system. Again, using all the context and all the data around it. In fact, if you ask the question right away, it might be providing other key performance numbers or data points that are contextual and maybe impacted by the situation. Oh, I forgot about the legacy and the fact that they wanted to leave some money to their children. Or, did you also remember that they were planning to loan their children $40,000 for a down payment on the mortgage? The reason this matters and the reason that headless architecture matters is responsiveness. A traditional planning tool, and there's lots out there, requires you to navigate to the right module, enter the data in prescribed fields, run a specific projection type, pull up, the right audit report, pull up the right piece of paper, pull up the right thing, generate output. A headless approach basically means the interface shaped itself to the conversation, not the other way around. And so this is what it makes it feel like a real-time partner, real-time co-planner, whatever you want to call it, rather than just software. And you're doing it in a way that brings it contextual, brings it in plain language in a conversation you can have with the client in a visual that makes sense at the right time.
And I think what's really important to kind of to touch on with what Ken just said is you're not just leveraging a large language model to do this. This is using the language to feed information into a deterministic model
Yeah.
that is then running those calculations, right? So you're not going to get an inconsistent result when a model changes like you do if you're using a large language model with just prompting. And the reason is because the large language model is interpreting the language. It's doing exactly what it was built for. Interpret the language and then feed the individual bits of information into the deterministic model, which is running the same thing. It's a computer. It does the same thing every time you ask it to do it. So it's literally running those calculations the exact same way every time it runs it. And for what if analysis, that's incredibly important because if you're trying to do what if with a large language model, you have too many variables. Did the probability of the large language model say that you meant 13 years when you said 13, or did it mean 13 months? It depends on the context that the large language model interprets when it runs its probability. When you're putting that into a deterministic model, the time period is the time period, right? And it's just going to run that over, it's going to give you the same result every time.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why if you're really building production software that's going to be out there for hundreds and thousands of people to use it, you really need to have a combination of the chat capability, which will give you information. It's a feeder to your real deterministic model that's going to be running something.
Yeah. And it writes to record, which is important too for compliance purposes. If you need to go
Yep.
back, like God forbid that like that scenario happens and you've given advice and the client's made a decision, right? So, you're going to get options, you're going to get scenarios, you're going to provide the advice to it. But that scenario that you ran through the model, like in this case, you're using an LLM to have that conversation. It's still writing to record, it's still saving it, it's still from a compliance perspective as part of the underlying plan, so to speak. So you're not in danger of, going back and saying, I'm going to rerun the prompt. And now again, the model's updated. We're in a new world. I'm going to rerun the prompt, but now it's using, Mythos 5.4, and you're going to get a completely different answer. So, if those things come back and you have to keep that history around, but the history of, what was the math used at the right time, the request and where it came from, it becomes more important than ever to kind of blend and have that true source of calculation, but then that source of record.
Absolutely. John, for the firm leader who hears all this and thinks my team is probably already doing some of this, what's the right posture? Is this about locking things down, or is there a way to channel energy constructively?
Well, you really do want to channel the energy, right? Because as we talked about in the beginning of our webinar today, the best way to learn artificial intelligence and learn large language models is by doing it, by using it. So what you want to do is you want to be able to put some structure around it. And how do you do that? Well, the first step is your acceptable use policy. This is what you can use, this is what you can't use from a tool perspective. These are the use cases that are good. These use cases that are not so good that we don't want you doing. That's the first step. The second step is get people to understand the tools that they have before them. If you're a Microsoft shop and you've rolled out Microsoft Copilot, invest in some real training that people can understand the difference between Copilot Work and Copilot Web. What's the context that the artificial intelligence has when you're using these tools? Because it's a very big difference when you think about the results you're going to get based on the context that it has. So first, acceptable use policy. Second, really train them on the tools that they currently have. Third, try to get them to document down their use cases. What is this use case? Does this help just Dylan? Does this help the entire Oasis group, or does this help the entire industry, right? Does it extend beyond a department? Can it help my whole organization to do something? That's how you really start figuring out what are the use cases that we want to use more broadly, that we want to maybe invest more resources into versus use cases that were like, hey, listen, it's great that this could help you personally. Please work on it. But that's not something that we're going to take broadly out in the organization. That also gives you a pretty good sense of where you need to make investments. If this is a use case that can broadly help the organization, you're probably going to want to invest in it. If this is a use case that helps a department that only has 3 people in it, you're probably not going to want to make a huge investment in that. So get them a policy so they understand the rules of the road. Give them an ability to train them really well on the tools so they know the capabilities they have in their hands today. Get them to think about these use cases and get them to focus those use cases on how broad can I use this or not use it? And can the tools that I currently have satisfy this use case? I'm going to give you a really concrete example. We are working with a client right now that would love to bring financial planning data and CRM data together. It sounds amazing. I could query data about a client. That sounds fantastic. How clean is their CRM data? Oh, it's not very clean at all, right? How clean is the financial planning data? Well, we have a lot of financial plans that are sitting on a drive, on a SharePoint drive. But we really only want to look at the latest financial plan. We don't want to look at these older plans. Okay, well, how do you tell the artificial intelligence that? Right? That now you're making it a little more complicated. It's not look in this directory at that file. It's look in this directory, look at all the files, find the most recent file, okay, and then use that file for your as a source of truth, if you will, on the financial plan. Also, remember, large language models take in everything you give them and it tries to run these probabilities. So if I've got all of my clients, let's say I have 5,000 clients, and I only have 2,000 pieces of data populated, one of these pieces of data is only populated for 2,000 of the clients, what's the large language model going to do? It's going to try to infer the other 3,000 values when it runs it. Okay. It may infer those based on the demographic of your client. It's going to try to fill in the blanks. That's how you get hallucinations. When it tries to fill in the blanks, it may not fill them in exactly right, in which case it's hallucinating on how to fill those blanks in. You're going to get very, very strange results. So why did I give you all of this?
Mhm.
That use case sounds fantastic. You have zero ability to deliver on that today. You're going to get really weird results, and you're going to be feeling like you're chasing a moose, because every time a new model comes out, the results are going to get even stranger. You go and fix this one little piece, new model comes out, it's all messed up again, and you got to try to fix it again. So when you think about the use cases, the final point that I'll say is you really need to be honest with how ready am I for this use case? Is my data good for this use case? Do I have a well-defined business process around this use case? Do I know who's going to own it after it's put together? Because someone has to own it. Someone has to test it when a new model comes out. Who is that going to be? If the answer to any of those questions is I don't know, or I got to figure that out, it's not a good use case. And you should move on to something else. Start small. That's my recommendation. Start small and build upon it. It's technology. If you start very simple, we'll just make it complicated later. It's tech. It can always get more complicated.
For sure. And just kind of and I'll kind of add to it, but also emphasize the questions. But as a firm leader, ask questions, and John hit this one. What model are we using? What model do we want to use? What models do we consider? What data is this model trained on? What data does this model have access to? What are the information sources behind it, not just the data that was trained on? Validated by whom? That's important, right? Both from the model perspective and the sources that you're going to. Can you show me the output methodology? If I ask a question of where did you come up with the answer, where did it come from? So quick example, you go into a public chat GPT, you sign up for it and you ask a question, you're going to sometimes the response back, oh, I found this great answer on Reddit. Cool, that's awesome. I'm glad that that's an unvalidated source that it went to. I have asked questions of an LLM and it has literally come back with silly things like, sorry, I didn't know the answer, so I just made something up, right? Or I found this information source from 2015 that I thought was great. Or when was the last time your data was updated? I only have information up to August 2025. Whoa, right? Those are scary things. What did it get wrong? How do I know if it got things wrong? Where can I verify the results of said model in the events we are sued? And then probably the biggest thing at all, and I know kind of John mentioned this as well, is as the firm leader, do you have the documented use cases in your process of what people are wanting to do, can do, should not do? If you're held to the fire and it's essentially um, this person's using AI for things, do you know what they did? Do you have an understanding of what they're allowed to? Do you know what they built, or are they, going off the reservation, so to speak, or off the parameters and kind of building something that's not specific to the business and that's somehow leaked into what they're supposed to be doing? All those things are important to do. Now, again, the flip side of this is you don't want individual, people in your firm, advisors coming to you to say, I want to use AI to do this. I want to use AI to do that. That would be a nightmare. IT requests coming in. So the important part is having those processes, having those things documented, having the processes in, understanding where things are coming from. All of that will make it easier, will empower your users to AI responsibly and effectively throughout the organization. And for you as a leader of the firm, as the RIA, as whatever, to stand behind the value it brings to the company. Those are all important things.
I want to touch on, or if I can, highlight two things
Yeah.
that Ken said that are really that I just want everyone to take away because I think they're very important. The first is when you're working with artificial intelligence and you generate a result set, you should say to it, show me the citations. What were the sources? of what you used in your input to come up with this analysis. That's really important to cut down on hallucinations and increase explainability, right? If you ask for a citation and it made it up, it's great at tattletaling on itself and going, I made that up. Let me go out and find a citation for you, right? That's number one. And number two, you need to have a level of explainability. You need to be able to understand how did it come up with this result? Black boxes do not work in our industry. So you need to have that explainability. And the second thing that I want to say is I love it when I see these things online that says prompt engineering is dead. Prompt engineering can never die. And here, let me explain why. You're talking to a machine. That machine talks in zeros and ones, full stop. That's what it has. It's literally electric logic gates. It's either open or closed. If you don't know how to talk to the machine, you're never going to get a really good result. So people are like, prompt engineering is dead. And then you go look at the way they've constructed what they gave to the large language model. And you're like, oh, wow, look, there's a purpose, there's a role, there's context, there's exactly the output parameters that I want. Here's some of the constraints that I've given it. It's a prompt. You just happen to put it in one paragraph. Okay. By the way, we could do this with code all the time. I could give you one line of text. It just has semicolons in it. And guess what? C++ picks that up as different lines. It looks like one big thing of text. Prompts, when you're talking to a large language model, you need to understand how to talk to it. And that is always going to be prompt engineering. You may not call it prompt engineering. You may call it paragraph discussions with large language models. It's prompt engineering. So the reason I wanted to bring that up, Ken, is when you're like, hey, these are the results, and then you say, well, where did you get that? Or what was the last data set you looked at? Maybe you should go out to the internet and look for a
Yeah.
more reputable source for this. That is literally the conversation with the large language model. And if you don't know how to do that, and you don't know how to structure prompts around it, you're just going to get very inconsistent results every time you do this,
Mhm.
which in some cases may have you write an article about why you get wrong answers from large language models.
Yeah.
Ken, as we wrap up, what does responsible AI adoption look like for a wealth management firm in 2026? If you had to give firm leaders one concrete thing to do differently starting next week, what would it be?
Yeah, no, great question. And we've kind of touched on this through as well, but kind of reemphasize a couple of points. So responsible adoption to me means you're building governance, not just accumulating tools. And so John had mentioned that before. And the firms that do that well aren't the ones that necessarily move the fastest. They don't need to be number one. They're the ones that stay curious and move deliberately. So they're like, documenting the use cases, they're understanding, they're asking the questions that we just mentioned. So if there's one thing I'd tell a firm leader to do next week, and that's would be to conduct a quick AI survey of all the folks throughout the organization, all of your advisors, all of the support staff, especially anyone providing advice to the clients, and ask what AI tools are you using? Are you using anything client related? And what are the use cases that you're trying to solve? And don't, no judgment, no consequences. You want the visibility to start. And my guess, and we've done some of that internally here as well, at my firm, just to kind of, see what people are doing, or more importantly, what they want to use. But the answer is surprising. And that list is just to start. You're not going to ban things necessarily, but you're going to figure out specifically where the guardrails need to go. And why are you doing all this? Why are you asking the question? Why are you asking the surveys? Well, first of all, you can't govern what you can't see. The inventory of tools, the inventory of use cases, it's going to be the foundation for policy and compliance. And what would you expect from a vendor? Other thing to note is these use cases will evolve over time. What we're using AI for today is not going to necessarily be what it is tomorrow. It's always changing and adding. And I know that can be a pain on the InfoSec guys, right? Because they want to know specifically what you're doing and how you're doing it and all those things. But what I have told my InfoSec team, tomorrow I might find a new use case, and that's okay. So their responsibility is to understand where you're at, and as firm leader, where people are going, and then set the rules of you very clearly. What should you not be doing? Don't put client data into public LLMs. Don't do this. Don't do that. And that's your governance. That's your policy. And so, why is this important? Well, in an industry that we are all in, where trust is the product, the standard for AI has to be the same and has to be held to the same standard as anything else. It needs to be verifiable, explainable, and accountable. So that's kind of where I where I've been thinking about these things, very frequently later or lately. So no, great question.
I'd like to add on what Ken said. When you think about this, the risk around this, right? It used to be, and when I say used to be, like a year ago,
Yeah.
we had compliance in one silo, we had cybersecurity and IT in a different silo, we had the business in a different silo. Large language model deployments have blown that entire model up. You need to have a, a governance and risk committee now that has representation from compliance, from legal, from vendor management, from your business, from IT and information security, all talking together. And the reason is you're going to have new models and you're going to have new use cases, you're going to have new tools that are popping up all the time. You need to talk as a team and say, well, what do you know on the vendor side? Here's what we're concerned with on the cybersecurity side. What do you think on the compliance side of things? Have we looked at the contract that they have in their user agreement on the legal side? You've got to be able to have a committee around this to move quickly because your teams are going to want to move quickly. So the process of, well, first we have vendor management look at everything, then we have infosec look at everything, then we have that process could take a month, month and a half. That's not the speed at which some of this stuff is moving now. So really having a risk and governance committee together, because by the way, when a new model rolls out, or as you're going to see very often right now, incumbent vendors who have already gone through your whole process now add an AI capability into their product. What do? You need to have a process built around that. And that's a governance and risk process that is not the traditional waterfall process that we do when we onboard vendors. That's doesn't exist anymore.
Absolutely. That takes me to the end of my questions. We have two questions here from the audience that I'll ask to both of you. The first one is, how do you think about data security when advisors are running client scenarios through AI tools? Where does that data go, and how do we know it's protected?
Can you go
You,
first?
so there's this, that's a good question. I mean, it's kind of interesting, but I mean that's the importance of getting governance around this and building. There are versions of these large language models that you can get that are enterprise version or enterprise hosted versions of it or team hosted versions. And there's a few things you need to look for. And there's terms like zero data retention, and we do not train our AI models on your data. So if that's not in the model that your advisors are using, then they are putting client data out into the ether that is out there and is now part of the model for training and things like that. And who knows who's looking at it at Anthropic or OpenAI and things like that. Those to me are the most important things. Um, and it can be anything from I've generated a client report out of a tool statically, and now I've put that client report into the public model because the report's too big or too long or whatever it is, or extract the data out so I can use it elsewhere. So that's the first thing I would look out for, and that again goes back to the other question about about governance is make sure right now when you maybe even before you do the survey that those are the two things that people ask. And honestly, the easy part is each advisor, each user can ask the question of the model. It's like, do you retain data, and what do you do with the data I provide to you? And if it answers those questions of I use it to train myself and I send it right to Sam Altman, then bad, don't do that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. We get the question around data security a lot. I think, from again, I'm going to come back to the risk committee that I spoke about a moment ago, right? When an incumbent tool rolls out a new AI capability, you have to have a conversation with them about, well, how did you create that capability? What third party tools are you using on that? Where do those third party tools live? And what are you doing to send my data? What are you doing to encrypt my data when it goes?
That's
And
it.
what's happening on the way back, right? So that's why when I come down to it, you have to have a committee because someone from InfoSec is going to ask the questions about the encryption, right? Vendor management is going to ask, well, where's the third party Like what third party you're actually using to store this data, right? Or to process this data. So you can't have any one of those conversations by themselves. You really do need to share the information across everyone. And that's where you can come down, then you can make a decision. Are we comfortable with this or are we not comfortable with this? It's not like your incumbent vendors are asking you, do you want to roll out the new AI capability I put in my tool? They're just turning it on, right? So they're not even turning it on in some cases with user or role-based security around it. They're just turning on the capability for your team to use. You have no ability to turn that off or to toggle it or to eliminate or limit the number of people in the firm that can access that capability. So we're in the wild, wild west at this point with feature rollout, and you've got to be able to react to that. It's not an easy thing. I wish there was an easy way to do this, but it's just not right now. Um, and you can't stick your head in the sand and hope it all goes away either. You're going to need to take a look at your risk committee or create a risk committee. You're going to need to staff that risk committee appropriately, which is not a full-time job, but it's a bunch of people's part-time job now. And you've got to make sure that they're meeting on a regular basis to evaluate new capabilities that have come out. And by the way, don't worry, like you can't wait for release notes to to do this, right? You've got to be monitoring what did my vendor just announce? What are they rolling out at this point? And how do I react to it? Otherwise, they'll roll out the capability. You'll figure it out 3 or 4 months later when all your like you've got a whole swath of folks in the organization using it, and you have no idea what your cyber risk looks like or where that data is going or if it's encrypted. You're behind the eight ball, and that's not a place you want to be in today's environment, especially with Reg SP. If you're an RA under a Reg SP, you're supposed to be on top of that according to the regulation like today. So it's going to be challenging.
Yeah. But yeah, and yeah, reputable or enterprise agreements with reputable companies is the way to get around this type of thing. But you're right, though. I think where we're at right now is you do have to ask for them, and so knowing what to ask is important. So everything that John mentioned, right? Data processing agreements, zero data retention commitments, encryption guarantees. Even what how are we notified? Really you can't wait for the release notes, but how are you notified of updates to models and things like that so you can make changes? Where hosting, all of those things are super important to make sure it never touches a public model directly. It's honestly as important as knowing what people are doing to know what these models are doing with the data.
And by the way, the last thing I'll say on this is a SOC 2 is never going to protect you. You can make a paper airplane out of that SOC 2 from now on and throw it away. It is not going to protect you. You need to really be asking these questions.
100%.
Yeah, our last audience question here, kind of working off the last question that was asked. Our compliance team is nervous about anything that touches client data. How do you make that case to a cautious CCO that is worth exploring?
Well, I'll say this to start, and then you can jump in. If you're a Microsoft environment, congratulations, you've already rolled this out because Microsoft rolled out Copilot, and Copilot Work has access to everything that's in your SharePoint, everything your user has access to, Copilot Work has access to. Unless your IT team has gone through great lengths to turn off Copilot Work, your team has access to it. So what you need to do is you need to really start taking a look at what your what your AI policy looks like. Um, because in all likelihood, the horse has already left the barn. You just got to figure out where it ran in the pasture and try to reel it back in. So um, if you're nervous about what artificial intelligence and large language models have access to the data, start with that survey. Hey, we're going to roll out AI across the organization. We'd love to know what you're using today as we make decisions on what we're going to license. Everyone will tell you what they're using today because they want you to license it.
Mhm.
Like full stop, right? So you're going to get a really good idea of what's out there and what people are doing with it. You can even ask what licensing level they're on, like Ken mentioned, right? If you're on a free version, it's not protected data, 100%. So you can really get a feel for them right at that point. You know, this is what I like to action cures fear. So if you're afraid of what's going on with this and you're nervous about it, act. Go out there and survey your team. Figure out what they're using today. Understand the license levels they've got. And then you're operating from a place of at least intelligence around what's happening, as opposed to, I'm nervous about what's happening. Act on it. Act on that nervousness.
Yeah, for sure. I would say don't try to convince a cautious COO that AI is safe in the abstract. You're going to lose the argument right away. That I mean, that's not their nature. And then John kind of hit on bring the use cases, bring the data handling agreement, ask them to evaluate that, do the work, get those things that we asked for. CCOs are trained to assess risk on certain parameters. And can I use AI? Can I use ChatGPT? Can I use even Copilot in some cases? Is too vague. So you need to be very involved. Like, can I use this tool with this person under these parameters with internal use, assuming no PI is involved? That they can actually answer that question. They can't answer, can I just use AI? So framing it as kind of like a risk on, risk off conversation. The risk of doing nothing is that people are using AI without any governance. You are in a shadow AI world because let's face it, everyone is using it in some form. And I think John hit on it too with the autocorrect. If you've ever used an iPhone, if you've ever used a BlackBerry and it's autocorrected, congratulations, you're using AI. I think you actually said that one time, John, is where I picked it up. I love
I
that.
did.
Yeah. So a cautious CEO understands that will prefer the controlled environment, prefer a controlled program to the alternative, which is going out and doing the thing, right? Because like the fact that it could, in the grand scheme of things, AI, what is, I think maybe this is you too, said it, John. I'm stealing all your quotes, but AI on its own is a dumb intern, but it does a lot of useful things for you, like context in emails, agendas, and I meant some of the stuff we mentioned before, creating visuals, putting numbers in a contextual way that's easier to explain. All of these things, even when you're using the verifiable calc source underneath, ensuring that the CCO understands that, hey, this is going to make our lives easier. This is going to reduce the time that we're doing X, Y, and Z. And in the end, get more advice in the hands of the end consumer, get more financial plans built as an IRA, RA, sorry, IRA, RIA, as a firm providing financial planning advice, all of those things, we can do more. And that a CCO will understand. They will not understand, can I use AI? They will say, can we be better?
No, I know we only have a few minutes left, but another question just came in really quickly. What would be your recommendation for firms who work with partners that say their models are deterministic but based on proprietary models slash calcs?
You want to take that, Jeremy? Me
Yeah,
to
you
start.
go ahead.
Show your work. I mean, that's the thing. So there are algorithms, there are other pieces of information, but in the end, when it comes down to things like taxes and cash flow and net worth projections, it is math, right? And so being able to take simple concepts, run them through, understand how the math is. Documentation is key. For example, there are things that will rank and score and prioritize. You understand how the scoring algorithm works. You go through, can they talk to it? Can they explain it? Those are all that things are important. And yes, in a world of algorithms like what you saw back in the days with robo advisors and stuff like that, sometimes that math is complicated. But if it can be understood and can be explained, that's the most important thing. Because in the end, that algorithm, that calculation, whatever it is, when you ask that a specific use case of if you're using an LLM of an agent and it goes back to get it, it has to be the same every single time when the question is asked in the same way, the data structure in the same way, and so on. If it's the same, it's deterministic. If it changes, it's probabilistic.
Yeah, and I agree with what Ken said a moment ago. You need to ask the vendor to be able to show their work. How did they prove out the model? What's the explainability level? Be very cautious if a vendor says to you, that's proprietary. No, it's not. You should be able to explain to me how this works. You don't have to give me a copy of your code or the exact algorithm, but you
Yeah.
should definitely be able to explain to me how it works. And you should explain to me how I'm going to get the same answer every time I use it. given the same inputs. And if they can't do that, you should run away as quickly as you can.
Hmm.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you, John and Ken, for this in-depth and insightful conversation. Before we sign off, I want to let our audience know where they can find more information on both of your firms. Ken, do you want to start us off?
For sure. You can find us at conquestplanning.com. We're pretty active on LinkedIn as well, trying to put some thought leadership out there under the tutelage and guidance of my friend John O'Connell. Yeah, definitely reach out to us if you have any questions you want to learn more about Conquest Planning.
Definitely.
And for the Oasis group, check us out at www.theoasisgrp.com. And please sign up for our newsletter. You can learn all about the webinars that we do. We publish the newsletter twice a month. So you'll learn about all webinars, you'll learn about where we're writing thought leadership, and you'll learn about the latest research that we have coming out.
Great. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks all.
Thank you very much.